In order to get the court to give you one of those, or give the FBI, it's usually the 5 Squad, the Division 5 of the FBI that engages in domestic investigations, political investigations. And all they need to do is have an articulable suspicion that information relating to the national security of the United States might possibly be discussed. Okay? And then all the constitutional barriers fall in the face of that. And so that is a very dangerous court. And that they started out, and they still maintain the pretense that one of the parties that they're undertaking the surveillance to get the information from has to be a foreign person, okay? So that they pretend to be sensitive about issuing these things against an American citizen, and that they're only allowed to look at conversations that involve a foreign person, okay? And I'm not saying that it would not have been legitimate to have one against Page, Carter Page. But the problem is, in doing a constitutional analysis, the test isn't really whether there was a legitimate grounds, if you were to articulate one, to do a FISA warrant against him. The question is, what is the standard that they had to meet? And if the standard they had to meet could have had them doing surveillance on anybody here in the room, that's unconstitutional. That's constitutionally overbroad. And it's too overbroad and vague what the standards are for that. And that this tracks back to the whole thing of 9/11. Even though the FISA courts predated that. But, that whole thing when everybody goes just kind of catatonic, Oh, okay. Do you want to tell me before you leave? Yeah, do it.
So I was going to break down the main forms of articles of impeachment for Andrew Johnson, Richard Nixon, and Bill Clinton. Yeah. Break them down to comparisons because of the historical analysis of it. I'm doing the first one, by the way. And then after that, do a non-impeachment. And I found this article in Wikipedia that breaks down for the sources who's been impeached by a House representative and who hasn't, and who has been acquitted and whatnot. So I was looking at that list, see comparisons, and if you guys you should actually really look at that list. It's on Wikipedia, but it informs you a lot about why people have been impeached and reasons for it, and a lot of them are similar to what Trump has done for obstruction of justice and articles that relate to that. So really do look that up. It'll help your paper a lot. So just using that as a source, and then compare the history of impeachment and non-impeachment with people that have been impeached and why with their articles, but mainly focusing around the ideas of Johnson, Clinton, and Nixon, and focusing how because of the cultural shift, because of identity politics sort of basis, they have these articles may be similar, but because of A, B, and C, they haven't been those. Okay. So it's kind of modern culture in comparison with historical analysis, and then bringing forth Clinton, Nixon, and Johnson, and comparing them to Trump.
Okay, you're free to go. Okay. Okay. All right.
I'm doing it on Trump's grip on the Justice Department, how the 2 pardons that he did with Joe Arpaio in 2017 when he pardoned this county sheriff with the court for the 2 he was a racial profiler, and Trump pardoned him. And I'm also doing his pardon on the former chief, for Dick Cheney, he pardoned him as well. And then I'm doing how he fired Comey, and how he always tweets out I can do whatever I want with the Justice Department. That's my department to overrun. So I'm doing how that his abuse of power is showing with who he's pardoning, and who he's firing within the Justice Department. He pardoned Scooter Libby, who has leaked information of CIA operates, and he was under oath when he said he did not. So he's rewarding someone who lied under oath, and he's showing that that's okay for an American to do that, and that's not only okay, but it's okay enough for you to get saved if you do that and to set up.
Straight, okay, that's great. That's a whole different, that's straight abuse of power. That's far out. That's great. No, that's terrific. You know, it's up out of the weeds. It's a whole different attack right at him, you know, of abuse of power. And it's smarter than going down in the weeds like a lot of them are on the particular obstruction of justice things. His flagrant abuse of power in the power that's been given to him, it's clear that he's not trustworthy to be vested with this kind of power, and that he's going to be abusing it, and not only for emoluments, you know, for his own personal financial benefit, though that's crass and craven, but just flagrant authoritarian doing that. So that's cool. Now you want to take a look though here, because there's this sleeping suggestion that he might be prepared to actually pardon some of these people. You know, that not just the offering or dangling of the pardon, which could be an obstruction of justice thing, but the actual granting of the pardons, okay? And so the question that you're really looking at here in some sense, a really important question is, in looking at a potential abuse of power charge against the president as a grounds for impeachment, what is the degree of discretion that the Congress of the United States really intends to delegate to a president? You know, to how outrageous can it be? You know, and you take a look at George Bush Sr. when he pardoned the first 6 people in Iran-Contra that were indicted by the special prosecutor after all those years and millions of dollars of investigation. He just flagrantly pardoned them, and it was clear that in fact he was pardoning them to avoid them testifying against himself. And it was Barr that recommended it. So that you circle back in on this thing with Barr in the impeachments, and because there's an awful lot of discretion that has been delegated to the president to allow him to pardon whoever he wants to. You know, and he even said, I can pardon myself, which is totally nuts, because it says right in the Constitution that he has the power of pardon except in cases of impeachment. Okay? Yeah, but go get him on the abuse of power. Okay? That's a good one. Okay, let's circle back now. Have you guys been thinking at all about what it is you might want to write about?
Yeah, so I'm thinking of doing the first prompt. I kind of want to look at the reasons for impeachment, and well, he didn't get impeached, but in Nixon's case, and then what are the reasons in the possible impeachment of Donald Trump, and then look at the differences and the similarities and why they're significant, and then what does it say about like the justice system.
That's a big one. I guess that's a big prompt. That was okay. All right. I would suggest, even as well, I would say this, that it is absolutely clear that the bogus impeachment attempt against Bill Clinton raises fundamental questions about the good faith of a party out of power in going after a president with whom they disagree on policy issues. It's a transparent act of that. But there's a thing that you don't know about yet, and there's no reason why you really should, is that the real motive behind impeaching Bill Clinton was because Henry Hyde, who was the United States Senator from Illinois, I guess, hardcore right-wing guy, was terrified about being indicted and impeached for his involvement in the Iran-Contra scandal. He was actually involved in overseeing and okaying the shipments of weapons to the Contras in the face of the Boland Amendment that had been passed by Congress prohibiting the administration from being involved in giving any aid, direct or indirect, to the Contras. And he got caught. He and Bill McCollum from the 5th District of Florida got caught actually in meetings with Rob Owen. Rob Owen was the former staff person for later Vice President Dan Quayle, when he was the senator from Indiana that took Birch Bayy's place, actually, when they canned Birch Bayh in 1980 with this October surprise thing. And Dan Quayle's staff guy on Latin American affairs, Rob Owen, became the liaison for Oliver North in meeting with the Contras and providing weapons to them. And they got caught in a meeting. Bill McCollum and Henry Hyde got caught in a meeting with eyewitnesses of going over the arms shipments that they were sending to them. And Hyde was terrified that he was going to get impeached and potentially prosecuted for that, right? And he was angry at the fact that the Democratic Party didn't stop the investigation of all of that, because the Democratic Party never initiated the investigation of all of that until they were forced to do so by public revelations that this massive shipment of military equipment was going down to the Contras, being coordinated through the Pentagon. Okay, so you have to take a look at that if you're going to look at the Clinton impeachment, because the lack of bona fides of the grounds on which they asserted it. And you remember, they went searching all around to try to figure out what to impeach him on. They started first with the Whitewater scandal of him allegedly being given special privileges in buying into this property, a Whitewater property, when he was governor in Arkansas. And they didn't get anything on that. And then they went looking to see whether or not the travel office of the White House was being misused to reward people. Then they went looking to see whether or not they were insisting upon getting campaign contributions in exchange for people being able to sleep in the Lincoln room. And there was this Star Chamber-like quality of the special prosecutors going after one thing after another, until they finally hit upon this thing with Lewinsky and him committing perjury. Okay? The reason that I'm raising this is you don't want to be citing the Clinton impeachment when everybody in town knows that it wasn't bona fide. Okay? So that they'd have to be able to con the American people into believing that it was bona fide to begin with. Okay? Which they obviously weren't able to do. They weren't able to convince that he had a 60% plus popularity rating, when they were trying to impeach him. And nobody believed that it was bona fide except the hardcore Republicans. And they didn't even believe it was bona fide. They just did it because they wanted to do it. All right? So I'm just suggesting that if you're going to be doing an analysis, you might preferably look at the Nixon impeachment stuff. Okay? Pardon? Yeah. And not spend an awful lot of time on the Clinton thing, because it's got all these depths and strange things going on about it that it's not a strong model to use. So I would suggest looking at especially because of the obstruction stuff. You got a straight up case of, wait a second, the stuff that Nixon allegedly got impeached for was the obstruction of justice. And it all came from that June 23rd meeting of instructing Bob Haldeman to go get John Ehrlichman and go over and see, Vernon Walters and Dick Helms over at the CIA, and have him contact Pat Gray at the FBI and tell him to get out of the investigation of the bank in Mexico City. That you're going to get digging down into this, and you're going to come up with a thing with, well, wait a second. What can you say about this? If that's why Nixon really got impeached and thrown out of office, why isn't it obvious that Trump should get thrown out of office? for any one of those 10 obstructive acts, but you're going to have to answer that. That's going to be the hard part, because if on the face of it, it doesn't make any sense, you have to offer some theory or thesis as to why why is it he's not being impeached hands down, with 800 former prosecutors saying he should be impeached and citing these obstruction things and then citing back to Nixon. What's the answer to that? Okay, so I would think that's the real exploration that you got to get into on this thing. You set it up in the first couple of pages saying here are the obvious parallels of this. It's right on the face of it. They're obviously parallel. And why is it that Nixon ended up getting out of office over it and Trump isn't? Okay? And you have to figure out what the answer to that is. Okay? All right. How are you coming? You thinking of anything yet?
So, the two that really caught my attention was the impeachment aspect. You guys talked about that one.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I think his abuse of power one. I think that was a little bit better when I listened to that one. And I think that's something that if I went more into it, I would be able to find something. But I think that's where I want to start. Okay.
So what are some of the kind of things that you're thinking of that he did that are abuses of power?
Well, I think if I were to start, I guess I would do it in a timeline sort of thing. I would start with the election, and although he didn't hold a position of power, this I can talk about his rise to influence with his members, and from there it solidifies his ability to just continuously lie in office and just shout his message without any sort of contention within his own party.
One of them is, for example, if in fact he was dangling offers to Russia to lift the sanctions against them, if they would give him support, that's abuse of power even as a candidate, And if he's suspecting that he probably isn't going to win, but he's abusing his power as the Republican Party nominee to try to lever getting to build the Trump Tower. That's an abuse of power as the candidate, as the nominee. So that's a good spot to start. You got the right idea of starting kind of a timeline of what are the acts of abuse of the power that he had at the time, whether a candidate or the nominee or the president-elect, or as the president. There's 4 different phases in which he had a certain kind of power, and that there are various types of acts he may have engaged in that would constitute abuse. And what you can do is you put those together as a pattern of abuse and make the argument that he should be impeached for an abuse of power. And that what you need to find out, and this is one that you both need to look at on the abuse of power thing, is where does it say that? When it says he can be impeached for commission of high crimes and misdemeanors, where do you get the abuse of power from? Okay, so everybody goes dashing to their local. Do you guys carry a copy of the Constitution around with you yet? You don't yet. Okay, you probably should. Yeah, you can get them. You can get them for free. There's a whole bunch of places that give them to you for free, but you guys ought to try to get one so when you're having these long discussions on Saturday night, hanging out at your house with all your friends and stuff, and the debate on the Constitution comes up, you guys can just whip this thing out and show it to them. Okay, so so find that where a straight up abuse of power where's the criteria for that? What type of precedents are there for that? Okay? All right. So that gets us through the first, that gets us through the list of them. Everybody's, I don't think you haven't told me yet.
I plan on analyzing what are impeachable offenses and connecting that to how Mueller just kind of kicks these ideas of this question of obstruction onto Congress. And how that kind of raises the question into raise the question of dividing like to constitutional duty to prosecute president with such case.
Yeah. So that you'll want to take a look at Larry Lawrence Tribe's book, because one of the arguments that he makes, in a sense, is that there's no clear constitutional obligation to impeach, even though he's saying something that sounds very much like it now. He's now saying there's, if they were in the face of all of this evidence, if the House of Representatives were to not impeach him, they'd be failing in their constitutional duty. And yet in the book, he writes that, it's not clear that there's an absolute obligation to impeach a president just because he does A, B, C, or D. That it's a political decision. And the political decision really opens onto this question of whether or not they believe he has lost his political power because of something he's done. Something he's done that has been exposed deprives him of adequate power to govern. He lacks legitimacy. The people don't believe him. They don't trust him. He's lost his ability to govern. And remember, that's exactly what Richard Nixon said. Richard Nixon said, I am resigning because I've lost my capacity to govern. Okay? Which is an interesting concept. And so that you might want to explore that because the actual political decision that needs to get made is usually by the members of his own party. Because usually the one party doesn't have a 2/3 majority in the Senate to convict him. Okay? And so they absolutely have to have some support from the president's political party. And so that the real political question that they ask themselves as the same party of the president is, has he been exposed for having committed certain acts that so undermine his credibility and legitimacy as the president that even we who are in his political party, who are inclined to support him, realize we have to ditch him and go to the other person in our party who's the vice president, to get them in power. Okay? So that's one that you might want to take a look at because you'll see in Larry Tribe's book, How to End a Presidency, that's what he's ultimately asserting, is that you really have to be able to get at a president to show that he's done something that has so undermined his ability to carry authority, to speak with some authority on behalf of the office of the presidency, that it behooves his own political party to join in convicting him. Okay? And you might want to point out why you think either they have reached that point with him or they haven't. And try to explore, why the Republican Party people are holding on so vigorously to him. Okay? Is that helpful? Okay. All right. Okay.
So I was looking over the prompts, and I really like the second one. Would want to focus on that. It's like what historical president would happen, and like what would the political discourse follow. And I would want to look into just like similarities of what were like voting patterns for the next presidential election after someone was impeached or almost impeached, like in the like Nixon area. And I would also want to just highlight that if he were to be like impeached or convicted on like climate change or environmental, it would set the precedent that the public wants a president who cares and recognizes climate change, and see hopefully if that changes like voter patterns or anything like that, like voting patterns.
Well, it would be really great if, because that second thing that you're talking about is so huge, and to sort of go through the whole part, the first part, which she's going to be working on anyhow, that you might take out a piece of that second prompt and take a look at this thing, is that try to explore the viability of impeaching him because of his conduct with regard to global climate change. Is there a way to craft an argument? And in light of how well you did on your first paper, I've got a lot of confidence in you on this. That if you focus on how one would go about setting forth the evidence against him with regard to global climate change and what a potential catastrophe it is and how strong the evidence is for what's going on here and how flagrantly he's disregarding all of that, and look to the kind of obligations a president has to protect the commonwealth of the people and to protect protect the national security of the country, and for him to be engaged in the active measures that he is, even setting aside the potential secret criminal activities that he's engaged in, the overt acts that he's engaged in, ordering the opening up of all the national parks for drilling oil and the Indian reservations and pretending when he, on the 24th of January, after he was inaugurated, coming forward and saying, well, there's sort of a national emergency, a domestic energy crisis. And so therefore we have to kind of override the Environmental Protection Acts, in order to going forward to the Dakota Access Pipeline and the KXL pipeline, that can you construct a systematic indictment of him for his imposing climate change on our country, and therefore show that that's a failure of office of him in such a profound way that he needs to be removed from office. Okay, that would be great. Okay, so that's cool, you guys. So look at don't hesitate. You got a week on these papers. All right. Are there any other questions? Yes.
So I was thinking that how before Watergate came out, how Nixon wanted to fire Cox.
Yeah, he did fire Cox.
Yeah, but that's when else he fired him. But then the Attorney General resigned.
That's right. Findings resigned.
Can I tie that to how Trump and
McGahn, of him trying to order McGahn to do it. Oh yeah, no, that's all real rich territory. Yeah, that whole thing with McGahn, ordering McGahn to go get him fired, firing this. It's important to point out though that and it's something that people don't really focus much on, but the fact of the matter is that Mueller is not a special counsel. Even though they refer to him all the time as a special counsel, they use that term. That used to be a particular statute that was passed by Congress to explicitly set up an office under the statute that could get triggered by certain things to have a person who is acting independent of the Justice Department. They use resources of the Justice Department, but there's no supervisory authority over them inside the Justice Department. That's the whole point of it. And even though he wrote the letter that he wrote, Mueller wrote the letter to Barr chastising him for stepping in and making a decision saying that there was no evidence of collusion and that there was inadequate evidence to support an obstruction charge. He said, that's defying the entire purpose of appointing, he said, a special counsel. Well, all he was an employee of the Justice Department because there was no special prosecutor statute. There was a special prosecutor statute back then. And so that, and the media has been quite successful in sort of blinking that distinction here, constantly referring to him as a special counsel, constantly insisting if he did anything to fire him before he got done with his job, that that would be a grounds for impeaching him and drawing back. But you need to recognize the distinction there, at least you drop a footnote. But yeah, the parallels between Nixon firing Archie Cox and then having his attorney general resign and the assistant attorney general resign, and he had to go all the way down to what's his name, Bork. Yeah, had to go. I mean, you got to go down pretty low to get to Bork, and he got to Bork, and Bork fired him and was rewarded by being nominated to be a Supreme Court justice for that foul act that he engaged in. So all of that's very important, and you got all kinds of stuff with McGahn similar to that. Okay? So anything else before we all run back and start working on the papers? Okay, great. Okay, now I know you're disappointed not to be here next Thursday, but I guess just strike. Okay?
Welcome. This is James Corbett at CorbettReport.com.
And I'm James Evan Pilato of MediaMonarchy.com. Bill Gates gets the boot. We've got that story, plus Celebrite gets the hack. But first, via the mail on Sunday, James, we kind of ended last week's episode saying, oh, geez, there is a lot of rough news. 2017 is already shaping up to be pretty rough. I like this story to begin with. Not that it's ha-ha funny, but I find it's an interesting insight into what we kind of see going on all around the world, and it comes via the Mail on Sunday. The vast majority of left-wing protesters arrested on suspicion of politically fueled offenses in Berlin are young men who live with their parents. The figures in a new report, which were published in the daily newspaper Bild in Germany, revealed that 873 suspects were invested by authorities between 2003 and 2013, in a decade. Of these, 84% were men and 72% were between 18 and 29. More than half of the arrests were made in the Berlin districts of Friedrichshain, Kreuzberg, and Mitte, mostly during demonstrations. A third of them were unemployed, and 92% of them still live with their parents. The figures published in the Berlin newspaper said the offenses committed against a person, in 4 out of 5 cases, the victims were police officers. In only 15% of these cases, or rather in 15% of these cases, the victims were right-wing activists. The new figures were released by the Federal Office for the Protection of the Constitution, which also notes between 2009 and 2013, the Bild report claims left-wing assassins attempted to commit 11 murders. Now, I'm glad I actually translated the original Bild story from German, because I learned that their headline was 92% of the radically left-wing ones still live with Mummy. James?
Well, indeed, it reminds us of that quote that has been attributed to Winston Churchill, probably falsely. If you're not a liberal at 25, you have no heart. If you're not a conservative at 35, you have no brain. Yeah. But this is just more of that left-right divide and conquer nonsense that I see being pushed out absolutely as hard as I've ever seen it in my life right now. Not just from the mainstream, but from the pseudo-supposed alternative as well. It's all about just hating and making fun of and mocking and basically trying to put down anyone who doesn't agree with you 100% on everything. And it is about hate your neighbor, not your rulers. Which is the exact opposite of what I think we need to be concentrating on. So that's the way I see this story. And I have a lot more to say about this because I really think this is probably the most important issue we're dealing with right now. And Truthstream Media has put up a couple of great videos in the past week about this, about the divide and conquer and about chaos, programmed chaos and all of this. So I will direct people to those recent videos. And you don't want to dehumanize your quote-unquote enemy, because the real enemy is not your neighbors, it's not people living with their mommy or whatever. It is the people who own and control the system. It is the banksters. It is the people at the top of the system. It is not your neighbor.
An interesting flip side to this one, James, is we'll include as a related story from the BBC. Police forces across the UK paid out at least £22 million to informants over the last 5 years, according to figures obtained by BBC Radio 5. I think it's these kind of stories, and I mean all of these stories that we'll talk about this week on episode 297 of New World Next Week for February 9th, 2017. Hopefully try and get at the heart, or at least strike at the root and look at kind of deep state politics, of what really goes on behind the scenes, of how this divide and conquer has been going on and on and on. And James, I think, unfortunately, in some ways, it still hits on the purge meme that I have been talking about for the better part of the last year or so. Hate thy neighbor. It is, seasons don't matter anymore. We talked about the summer of rage. It turned into the fall. It just continues on and on and on. Our second story this week comes via Redmond Pie online, as back in spring of 2016, and we made only brief mention of it in some of the related headlines towards the end of the New World Next Week episode. Spring 2016, when Apple refused to unlock an iPhone 5C for the authorities following the San Bernardino incident in December 2015. The company made the argument that if created a tool for opening up an encrypted iPhone, then it would create the potential for that tool to fall into the wrong hands and ultimately make iPhone encryption obsolete. The FBI disagreed and went ahead and found someone else to do the hacking, Israeli firm Cellebrite. Now, in a turn of events that have more than a hint of irony to them, Cellebrite has now had their own servers hacked, with most parts of that iPhone hacking tool leaked now out on the web. A report by Motherboard cites a source who hacked into a remote Cellebrite server and stole 900 gigs of data, including evidence that Cellebrite also works for countries like Russia, Turkey, and UAE. I feel like I've maybe heard those countries mentioned in the news recently. James, this story happened a few weeks ago, or at least we hear about it a few weeks ago, and now this is slowly kind of catching your interest and everyone else's interest as well. What makes you hit up on this story right now?
Well, I think this is just particularly interesting given that we've just now seen the confirmation of Jeff Sessions as Attorney General, and as people know who are watching my recent interviews, like the one with Derek Brose, where Jeff Sessions has talked about the need to put backdoors into things, and who is very much a supporter of the iPhone incident that we saw last year with the San Bernardino thing and the U.S. government trying to get Apple to force the door open. Of course, we now know they went with Cellebrite to so they didn't have to force it legally. But this is exactly why you do not want to put backdoors into software or hardware so that the government can have their backdoor access, is because that access will be discovered by others. And now it's out there. It's out in the wild. So this super secret way that the government was able to unlock iPhones, hey, now it's out there, and presumably out there on the black market, and will be used by criminals. Surprise, surprise, surprise of absolutely no one. This is why you do not want to purposefully weaken security. This is why it is so dangerous. So I will direct people back to my conversation with Derek Brose about Sessions and about the war on encryption, that I think is going to be another one of the main themes of the incoming Trump administration.
And you just said Sessions got confirmed. I mean, he just got confirmed mere moments ago, pretty much as we were sitting down to tape this episode. 2 points, James, I want to include right here. I covered this story back on January 17th on my morning show. I do a daily morning show that I broadcast live. Israeli phone hacking firm Cellebrite confirms information security breach. And another one that goes along with this, I actually talked about this very morning, but I'll include a link in the show notes to a clip from that episode this morning. Ohio man's pacemaker data betrays him in arson insurance fraud case. It's a really interesting story about, obviously, a guy tries to burn his house down, but the data on his heart says a different story about what may have actually happened. I think it goes along with that story of the hot tub smart meter data being used as evidence in a murder trial. And these are the stories now of, James, things that we've talked about for, 7+ years on New World Next Week, have not only grown and hatched, it's sort of they're having their offspring, and we're seeing these stories now play out in court, and they even become just sort of part of the mundane background, and of course it's also massively precedent setting as well. So I'll plug myself with both of those Morning Monarchy links. As another thing we noted, James, last week was pretty depressing end. Some bit of good news, as I did not do a Good News Next Week episode this week. Gates Foundation mission shut down in India for their big pharma ties. And we grabbed this via India Times. India has shut down Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation on a critical national health mission and possible conflict of interest issues arising from the foundation's ties with pharmaceutical companies being just one of the reasons. All financial ties of the country's immunization advisory body with the Gates Foundation have been cut off. India Times has learned that the government's decision was informed by, among other factors, arguments from senior medical professionals centered around conflict of interest issues. There were questions about the Gates Foundation's ties with pharmaceutical companies and the possible influence this may have had on the country's vaccination strategy. Global Policy Forum raised some of these concerns in a study from December 2015 called Philanthropic Power and Development: Who Shapes the Agenda? It cautioned on the growing influence, whether sought or unsought, of the large global philanthropic foundations, especially the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, on political discourse and agenda setting. A lot of times it's kind of like whack-a-mole with eugenics-obsessed so-called elites like the Gates Foundation, but we'll take a good whack on them. James?
Yeah, exactly right. I mean, let's take this when we can get it. I'm not sure it exactly spells the end for Gates's immunization plans, but at any rate, it is an interesting move. And I would like to think this is part of that kind of dominoes that we've seen with Kazakhstan stripping U.S. aid workers of diplomatic immunity, and then China passing laws regulating NGOs, and then Russia declared the National Endowment for Democracy an undesirable NGO. India placed the Ford Foundation on a security watch list. All of this happened in the last couple of years. I wrote an article about this at the time back in 2015 called Beware Americans Bearing Gifts, NGOs as Trojan Horses. That I will put in the show notes so people can read through about that. But I think it is, I mean, it's obviously, I'd like to think it's part and parcel of that. And yet, I know that it's not like there's any love lost between Narendra Modi and Bill Gates. In fact, Gates was in town visiting Modi and the top-ranking Indian parliamentarians in the very week of the demonetization, and he was praising it and saying how, this will springboard the India into the new fintech revolution and blah blah blah. So I'm not sure this is necessarily directed at Gates per se. I think there may be obviously different organizations that are involved in putting pressure on the government to try to dissociate themselves with the Gates Foundation for a number of reasons. And as you say, let's take it for the victory as it is, but it's obviously not the final victory.
You make so many good points there, and I think just maybe the closing note on all of this that goes through the stories of the informants and the divide and conquer and the hacks and all of it. There's 4D chess going on. It's complicated. There's not a unified field conspiracy theory, and everything is all kind of connected. 4D chess going on, and essentially they want us to all kind of just play checkers and think it's all that simple, and that it is just kind of black and white. So in closing, all I'll say is we will continue to do that work like we've been doing.
Yes, we will. I'm looking forward to it again next week. Thank you.
Thinking about how important it is to make beautiful. And I think about that a lot because, no one in this room or in this lodge, we all know how ugly things can be. And there's certainly a lot of cruelty and ugly in this world. And every day you have this opportunity to make beautiful. And that's a lot of what I subscribe to, and try to do that in every way you can. We are all, I'm sure that you're perfect, but I'm not perfect, and so I get crabby or something. I'm trying to work on all of those things, on how we treat each other, how we, treat our world. But I noticed that over the past year, I spent a lot of my time fighting stupid projects, and I just think about how people, resist really stupid ideas. And I've spent most of my life doing that. And in part of that, it takes, I don't want to say it takes a toll on you looking at the brutality. And part of the balance is, of course, is making beautiful. And then the other part of the balance is making what the future is. Jimisawabandaming. What do we want for our future? Because you don't want to, I'm someone that I spend a lot of time saying why that is a bad idea. But what I really want to do is work to making the good idea, making the thing that is beautiful that we want to see. I've seen, probably as here, I've seen a lot of things come home, which is how you make beautiful. We used to have 13 drums, big drums, on our reservation. We have 7 back. Isn't that great? So it's part of this recovering your beauty that I've seen in my life. I worked for many years on land issues. We founded an organization called the White Earth Land Recovery Project after we've fought to try to get some just legislation to return land to our people. And then we got 10,000 acres back, but we didn't really get much justice. And so we formed this organization, White Earth Land Recovery Project, and we purchased land, or people donated land to us. And so about 1,400 acres of land. And on that, organic farms, maple syruping operations, wild rice processing facility, and a school. We bought a former elementary school. I just like how it is in our northern communities because, they always, want to take things from Native people, but when we want them back, they're like, well, why do you want it back? I was thinking, well, is that really your business, They're like, well, they had this kind of little uproar there. I was like, what do you think I'm gonna do? Start I'm gonna open a casino. That's ridiculous. It's like that. They were like, what do you want to do about it? They were trying to give me all this stuff. But so there we have a food processing facility and the first independent radio station, tribal radio station in Minnesota, which is called KKWE, Niji Radio. And a lot of it I modeled after OJB as the idea when we started it. And so, I guess what I'm saying is a little of our history, we look at what's out there and we see that our lot is not good. And, you could wait for someone to fix it. That's probably not going to happen, in my experience. No one is going to fix it, except for ourselves. And, at some point here, over the last, 30 years of probably way too much television and way too much shopping and way too much, self medication with whatever it is, which is a lot of people for sure. Yeah. We became pretty timid too. And I think that a lot of us relinquished a lot of our own personal ability to control our destiny. And I'm not even talking about the opioid epidemic. I'm talking about before that, where we became people that expected someone else was going to fix it for us. And we became people. I remember the first time we bought land up there on White Earth and bought some land and then we put up, what did we do? We fenced it. We had a fence. This power company was putting up a substation and we asked them not to put it up next to this Miigwetch grave, cemetery. And they put a split rail fence around that cemetery for us. And that substation was a little bit, it was like a little, you know what I'm saying, for electrical stuff, right? And I remember this one guy come to me, this one guy from my res came to me and he said, how'd you do that? He said, did you ask the tribal council? I said, no. He said, did you ask the BIA? I said, no. He said, how'd you do that? He said, that one old guy, Pete Saylor is his name, passed away. He said, he asked me to do it, so we just went and figured out how to do it. But that whole idea that we got to be these people that had to ask permission to live, y'all know what I'm saying. Ask permission to do this and do that, do this and do that. And that, I'm just saying that that's part of what's happened in my community. And I think my community is probably like a lot of other communities. You feel like you relinquish your power. We relinquish our power. And I think that, what I've seen is that when you take back your power, you have this opportunity to be really beautiful. And I like to see that. I like to see that. And, everyone here has, taken back some of that, which maybe we gave away, or we're just like insecure, or, really, just relinquished, but we took it back. So, I have faith in that process. I've seen what happened in my own community when we start that. And then, when people see that you do that, then they kind of give themselves permission, which is what we have to do those things. Give ourselves permission to be beautiful. Give ourselves permission to not only remember our songs and our ceremonies, but give ourselves permission to envision what our future is going to be. Envision that. Who is going to envision where we are going? Who is going to envision that? Who is going to, say, 50 years from now, this is what my village is going to look like. This is where our water will come from, right? This is where our food will come from. This is what we will be eating. This is what we will be thinking, right? This is what our schools, or how we will educate and raise leaders. This is what our economy is going to look like. And this is how we're going to treat each other. So I think about that a lot, and that's what we're trying to do in my community. But I think about that because I really want us all to be thinking about where we're going. Everybody in here deals with, and we all know, I've raised 7 children. And I have to say new ones show up. And I bet a lot of other moms and aunties have the same thing. I have a house full of 18-year-old boys. And a lot of them do not have mothers. Opioid. Everybody here knows this story. And they are just beautiful young men that want hope. And they want to do something, and they have a right to do something beautiful. And to be those beautiful people. And so, I spend a lot of time just making sure that that's happening. So I'll tell you a couple stories about that, and then, but that is what I think is that we get caught in the present crisis. Everybody here, I'm easy to get caught in that. And then, and our girlfriends got to unload all their bags on us, I'm like, you let that go, girl. What I'm saying is that there's a lot of, continuous lateral stuff and drama. Oh my God, so much drama. And, but I think our goal has to be beautiful. And think where we're going and not caught in the drama. While we have to help our sisters heal and our communities heal, we don't want to be in a constant drama, right? But you can only do your best, and you got to pray really hard, to have the right decisions. And then also, in your behavior. I was thinking about how a lot of you been around a while, and certainly my relative Eddie there, is this story about how, I used to observe sometimes that the AIM leadership, I felt like that they didn't really raise leaders. And I remember seeing, and I'm thinking that I wish that those guys would raise that next generation of young guys to speak, or to be in front of the microphone, or to be, right? And so I was, thinking about it, because I think that as women, we raise leaders. That's what we have to do. And thinking about young women in my organization. I was at a meeting here a few days ago, and one of my staff pointed out that I also need to be careful to not be too critical of those young women. I'm always holding them to a really high standard, because I was held to a pretty high standard. But they're like, no, you got to make sure that they know that they have that permission to speak. And they have that courage, and they take that. Because I don't want to make the same mistakes of not raising this next generation of leaders, and whoever they are. But we have to provide that leadership, because people have not given themselves permission. And people are afraid. And a lot of people just drink way too much Kool-Aid. Right? Y'all know what I'm saying, right? Including our own people. And some of us have to say, this is where I think we're going. Some of us got to stick our necks out and do that. And if we, I'm like so ready for the next economy. This last one did not work out well for us, right? And so we could go like this, like my Randy Zortman did, or we could say, this is what we're doing. And what I know is like my tribe, we're on the cutting edge of this hemp industry. And while my rural local utility will not put up any solar this year, my tribe's going to put up 200 kilowatts, right? And we're going to build a solar thermal panel in a manufacturing facility. And then I'm going to build a hemp mill. That's what we're going to do because, just like Mary Ellen said, is you got one dream, And what I also know is that a lot of people, like I would say a lot of rich people too. I mean, like we're funded largely by 1%. And on one hand, a lot of these people have divested from fossil fuels because they can see the planet is baking. And we have catastrophes of biblical proportions going on. And what they want to do is they want to invest in the next economy. And so to the extent that we need that capitalized, we need to have that vision on where we're going. But what I know about the next economy is many things. Is I know my friend Philip Whiteman, my Cheyenne sister, you should probably know Philip Whiteman. He's visiting with me in New York, and he just we have this I don't know, he just comes up to me with has some profound thing he's been waiting to tell me. He said, this economy is about competition. The next economy is about cooperation. And that's what we need to do as Anishinaabe people, or as all of us. But my point is that for my community and for them young guys I hang with, to know that we have someplace we can go that is full of hope, that is not the same. And I see these guys out there in the field, and I'm proud. I'm proud to work with them. And I'm proud that because I can have all the ideas in the world, but if you don't put your mana'o or your heart and your back into it, your prayers, and if you don't have y'all gotta do it together, Mama. That's how you make those things happen. So that's kind of what I want to say. I'm so happy to be here with y'all. How you make things beautiful. So thank you, Miigwetch. Thanks for your time.